There's a moment most people have felt but never fully named. You end a relationship. Maybe it ended badly, in silence or in the kind of argument that leaves marks. Or maybe it simply faded, the way a dream dissolves once the light comes in. And you tell yourself, next time will be different. You know yourself better now. You've learned something. You'll choose more carefully, more wisely, with eyes that have already been opened. Then, somewhere weeks or months later, you meet someone, and something moves in you. That particular gravitational pull, that feeling of recognition, as if the world has suddenly found a center it was missing. The conversation is easy. The silences feel full. And somewhere underneath the ordinary surface of getting to know each other, you feel, if you're honest with yourself, that you already do, already know them, somehow, already chose them, even before you understood what you were choosing. And then, slowly, too slowly to notice when it's happening, you begin to realize the details are different, the name is different, the face is different, the story they tell about themselves is different, but the emotional logic of it, the particular way it unfolds, the specific role you find yourself playing, the flavor of the longing and then the disappointment, that part is the same. Different faces, same story, same wound, resting new clothes. Have you ever stopped, really stopped, not at the surface level but somewhere quieter than that, and asked yourself why? Not the answer you give a therapist, not I grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent, or I tend to choose people who mirror my attachment style. Those answers are real, they're sitting there, and they matter, but they're sitting on top of something older and stranger, something that Carl Jung spent most of his life trying to map, not as a pathology, but as a structure, a feature of the psyche that operates before memory, before language, before the conscious self even enters the room. What if the person you keep falling for doesn't entirely exist? What if, long before you ever met them, before you knew their name, before you sat across from them and felt the floor shift beneath you, something inside you had already written the whole story and then projected it like a film against a blank wall onto whoever walked through the door with enough resemblance to the inner image? That question is what this entire video is about. And if it lands somewhere in you that feels uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is a signal worth following. Before we go further, if this is already touching something in you, I want to invite you to do something small. Hit like if this kind of territory is what you came here for. Subscribe so you don't lose this thread when the next video drops. And in the comments, tell me what's one pattern you've noticed in the people you keep falling for. Describe it in one sentence. I read every single one of those, and sometimes a single sentence in the comment section reveals more than an hour of conversation could. Now let's keep going. Think about the last time you fell for someone. I mean really fell. Not a mild interest, not a pleasant acquaintance that deepened over time, but that other thing, the sudden thing, the one that felt like gravity. Try to go back to the first days, that particular quality of heightened attention, the way the phone seemed to be the only object in the room, the way ordinaries. Moments acquired a kind of shimmer they didn't have before. The way you listened for their name in conversations. The slight unreality of it all, as if ordinary life had become more vivid, more meaningful, more alive than it usually manages to be. And then ask yourself, as honestly as you can, how much of what you felt was actually about them, about who they specifically are, their real contradictions, their actual habits, the specific texture of their daily life, the version of them that exists at 2 a.m. when they're tired and unguarded and nobody is performing anything? Or was it about what they seem to carry, a quality, a presence, something you couldn't quite name but that you recognized when the nasan, and I use that word deliberately, recognized as if you'd been waiting for it, even though you couldn't have said what you were waiting for. Most people, when they examine this honestly, find something quietly uncomfortable. In those early weeks, they were responding to a possibility more than to a person, to a figure more than to a human being. The other person gestured towards something with their voice or their confidence or their particular way of holding silence or the specific texture of their sadness, and that something activated a response in you that was entirely disproportionate to what you actually knew about them at the time. Jung noticed this pattern in his clinical practice across decades of work. Patients would describe falling in love with an intensity that bordered on the mythological, the sense that this person was singular, irreplaceable, the only one who had ever truly understood them. And then as time progressed, something would shift. The person who had seemed luminous began to seem ordinary, sometimes smaller than expected, sometimes disappointing in ways that felt, curiously, like a personal betrayal, as if they had promised something, and failed to deliver it, even though no such promise had ever been spoken aloud. Jung's observation was precise and unsettling. The person hadn't changed. The projection had simply worn thin. The pattern, different faces, same internal story, is not a coincidence, and it's not a flaw in your character. It's a mechanism, and the name of the mechanism is something Jung called the Anima and the Animus. Carl Jung built his map of the psyche over decades, and he built it in layers. The personal unconscious close to the surface, the collective unconscious beneath it, and within both autonomous. Structures he called complexes, constellations of emotion, image, and energy that operate with their own logic, largely outside conscious awareness. The anima and the animus are two of the most powerful of these structures. In the male psyche, Jung identified what he called the anima, a feminine principle, not in any reductive cultural sense, but as a living interior presence that carries the qualities the conscious male personality has not developed or has actively suppressed. It manifests in moods, in irrational responses, in sudden surges of feeling that seem to arrive from nowhere. And critically, it reaches outward. It projects itself onto women who, in some quality or gesture, seem to embody what the inner image demands. In the female psyche, the animus performs a parallel function, a masculine interior presence that carries qualities the conscious female personality has not integrated. Assertiveness, authority, the capacity for intellectual conviction, the drive toward an abstract meaning. The Animus too projects onto men who seem to carry what the inner image has been holding. Jung described the anima as having layers of development, beginning at the most primitive level as a purely instinctual feminine presence, progressing through the idealized romantic figure of courtly tradition, then the virgin as bearer of spiritual grace, and finally arriving at the highest level of integration, at the figure of Sophia, wisdom itself. The animus moves through its own developmental sequence, the man of pure physical power, the heroic figure, the bearer of meaning, and ultimately the figure of spiritual truth. What matters is not the schema itself, but the implication. In most people, these interior figures have never been consciously met. They have never been examined, named, or worked with, and so they do what every unexamined psychic content inevitably does. They project. They go looking in the outer world for a vessel that matches the inner image, closely enough to trigger the response. And when they find one, or even someone who vaguely resembles the image, the result is the experience we call falling in love. You think you're choosing them, but something inside you chose long before you met. The force of attraction in these moments is not a measurement of compatibility, it's a measurement of resonance, the degree to which this person's outer qualities match the inner figure that has been waiting, sometimes for decades, to find its external form. Let me give you a way of seeing this that cuts through the abstraction. An image that I've found anchors the concept faster than any clinical description. You've seen augmented reality filters, the kind that place a halo around the face, or render everything in the warm tones of candlelight, or smooth and soften a landscape into something more beautiful than it actually is when you put the phone down. You put on the filter, and the world transforms. The transformation feels real, feels, in fact, more real than ordinary vision. But the transformation is not in the world, it's in the lens. The anima and the animus work exactly like that. When you encounter someone whose outer qualities resonate with your inner image, your unconscious doesn't respond with measured interest. It responds with recognition. And in that moment of recognition, it projects everything it has been holding, all the unlived qualities, all the longing, all the accumulated images of what love or depth or wildness or safety should feel like, onto this person like a filter that makes them glow. And here is what makes this so genuinely disorienting. The filter is entirely invisible to you. You don't experience yourself as projecting anything. You experience yourself as finally seeing clearly. More clearly, in fact, than you normally do. The person seems luminous, specific, singular. They seem to carry something that nobody else has ever carried, though you couldn't explain exactly what it is. That's not love at first sight. That is recognition. And recognition is a very different kind of experience. Recognition says, I know you already. And in the deepest sense, you do. You've been carrying the image of this person, or rather of what they represent, for years, perhaps your whole life. The experience of meeting them is less about encountering something new than about encountering something you forgot you'd lost. It feels like love at first sight, but it might be recognition, not connection. The distinction matters more than it might appear to. Because love, in the sense that requires another actual person, is built slowly. It requires disappointment and renegotiation, presence and genuine contact, the gradual discovery of who someone actually is beneath everything they project in return. Recognition bypasses all of that. It arrives already complete, already certain, already emotionally resolved, in a way that contact with a real person almost never is. This is why projection, in its early stage, feels so much more intense than love that has been built over time. It's more intense because it's more internal. The feelings are enormous, and they are enormous because they are yours, meeting themselves. The intensity you feel isn't coming from them, it's coming from you. And then comes the middle of the relationship. The filter begins to slip. Not suddenly. These things rarely happen suddenly. It happens in small failures of resonance, a conversation where they respond in a way that doesn't fit the inner image, a moment where the luminosity is simply absent and you don't know why, a morning where you look at them and feel for the first time the texture of ordinary reality, their specific humanness, their limits, the parts of them that have nothing to do with what you fell for. And most people, when this happens, respond with a version of the same thought. They've changed. Or, I don't know who they are anymore. Or, in the worst cases, I never knew them at all. That last version is the most honest, but not in the way it's usually meant. The person was always exactly who they are. The discovery isn't that they changed. The discovery is that you were never entirely seeing them. You were seeing the projection, and the projection was always a mixture of their actual qualities and your inner image's needs. When the filter slips, what you're left with is the reality that was always there. And reality, after a period of projection, can feel like loss. Jung was precise about this moment. He described the withdrawal of projection, the moment when the unconscious begins to reclaim what it sent outward, as one of the most psychologically significant events in a person's life, because it confronts you with a choice that most people never fully understand they are being offered. You can locate the loss in the other person, decide they failed, diminished, deceived you somehow. This path is familiar, and it leads eventually back to the beginning, a new face, a new resonance, the same projection wearing different clothes. Or you can locate the question in yourself. You can ask, what was it in me that needed this particular image? What did I place on this person that belongs, in truth, to my own unlived life? The second path is harder. It is also the only one that goes somewhere new. Here's where I want to pause for a moment. Not to interrupt the thread, but to acknowledge something real. What we've been working through in this video, projection, the interior image, the experience of recognition, and then collapse. I know this kind of material doesn't stay safely abstract. It has a way of landing, of opening questions that don't resolve in 45 minutes. And sometimes when that happens, what you need isn't another video. It's a structure, a place to take the questions that doesn't disappear when the screen goes dark. If you're feeling that right now, that sense of needing more room than this format allows, there's something in the description that might be worth your attention when this video ends. Not a shortcut, more like a path with better lighting. It's there for anyone who's ready to go further in a more sustained way. Now, let's keep moving. So, how do you recognize projection while it's happening? Not afterward, not in the wreckage, but in real time while the filter is still on. There are 4 signals, and once you learn to see them, they become nearly impossible to unsee. The first is intensity that arrives ahead of knowledge. Projection moves fast, faster than actual knowing, because it isn't doing the slow work of discovering who someone is. It's confirming what the inner image already expects. If you find yourself feeling, after 2 conversations, that you've known this person for years, if the certainty arrives before the evidence, that is a signal worth sitting with. Depth of feeling is not, by itself, evidence of depth of connection. In projection, it may actually be its opposite, a sign that you are responding to an internal image rather than to the person in front of you. The second signal is a fascination that is narrower than the person. You may know very little about them, their actual history, their daily frustrations, the complicated parts of their character, and yet this one quality has an almost hypnotic pull, their confidence, or their vulnerability, or the way they seem to move through the world without needing anyone's approval. When the fascination is disproportionate to your actual knowledge, when it is attached to a quality more than to a person, projection is likely at work. The Anima and Animus are always more interested in the symbol than in the human being the symbol is attached to. The third signal is the defensiveness that appears when the image is questioned. When someone who knows you well observes something about the person you're attracted to, something that doesn't fit the luminous picture you've been carrying, and you respond with something close to offense, as if they have said something unfair or categorically wrong, that is the projection defending itself. Unconscious projections feel like truth, not like interpretation. They resist being examined because examination threatens the resonance. And the fourth, perhaps the most telling signal of all, is the pattern that keeps repeating. Every time you say this one is different, your unconscious quietly disagrees. And the same emotional dynamic appears in relationship after relationship, the same arc of idealization, the same flavor of disappointment, the same role you find yourself playing. The common variable is not the people you've chosen. It is the interior image that keeps selecting them. Recognizing this is not the same as condemning yourself. Recognition is not self-judgment. It is simply the beginning of a different kind of seeing. Was she new? And different seeing is where genuine choice begins. What does it actually mean to withdraw a projection? Jung was careful here, and his care is worth honoring because the popular reading of this process often goes wrong in a specific way. Withdrawing the projection does not mean deciding that what you felt was false. It doesn't mean concluding that attraction is illusion or that love is impossible once you understand its mechanisms. It doesn't mean becoming cynical about desire or shutting down in the name of psychological sophistication. It means reclaiming what you sent outward. When you recognize that what drew you to a specific person was, in significant part, a quality that lives inside you as an unlived possibility. The work is not to walk away from the relationship or from love in general. The work is to begin asking, slowly and with patience, how do I become the carrier of this quality rather than continuing to search for it out there? The man who has spent years falling for women of enormous emotional freedom, and he begin to give himself permission to feel fully without the management strategies that have kept him at a safe distance from his own interior life, not as a performance, not as a therapeutic exercise, but as a genuine daily practice of letting experience land. The woman who keeps finding herself drawn to men of brilliant certainty, men who seem to know, can she begin to trust her own intelligence as a living relationship rather than a trait she manages? Can she begin to hold her own conclusions with the same authority she's been giving to theirs? What attracts you the most is often what you've never allowed yourself to become. This is what Jung meant by integration, and it is, in every sense, a lifelong process rather than a single insight. The qualities you've been projecting outward don't vanish when you stop projecting them. They don't disappear in a moment of realization. They begin slowly, through sustained attention and repeated practice, to come home, to become part of the person you actually are rather than part of the person you keep searching for. And what Jung observed, and what I believe anyone who does this work seriously will eventually discover, is that when you begin to genuinely integrate the anima or animus, the nature of your attractions doesn't disappear. It changes. The force of it becomes less overwhelming, less like being seized and more like choosing. The people you're drawn to may carry similar qualities, but the quality of the relating changes entirely because you are now in contact with an actual person and not only with a mirror for what you've been carrying alone. That is not the end of love. It may be, finally, its real beginning. If what we've explored in this video has landed somewhere real in you, somewhere that isn't only intellectual but also a little uncomfortable, a little clarifying, a little harder to dismiss than usual, I want to ask you to do something before you leave. Like the video if you want to keep going into this territory. Subscribe so the next step of this map is there when you're ready for it. And share this with someone you think might be trapped in a pattern they haven't yet found a language for. Sometimes the most useful thing one person can offer another is a question at the right moment. The link in the description is still there for those who want a more structured path into this kind of work. The same place I mentioned earlier. Worth a look when you're ready. And leave something in the comments. I mean this. Genuinely. Do you think you've ever loved someone for who they truly were, or for what they represented inside you? It's one of the harder questions. And your honest answer, whatever it is, will tell you something worth knowing. Jung described the unconscious as a river running beneath the ordinary surface of daily life, not dangerous in itself, not something to fear or seal away, but powerful in ways we only recognize when we've already been moved by the current, without realizing we were in the water, the anima, the animus. The projection that launches outward with the force of destiny, the slow collapse when the image can no longer hold. The question that waits underneath all of it, none of this makes love impossible. If anything, understanding it makes love more possible. Not the love that arrives like a seizure and burns out in recognition, but the love that is built in the space between two actual people over time, after the projections have been examined and gradually reclaimed. But that kind of love requires something from you. It requires you to stop directing all your attention outward, at the pattern of who you choose, at their failures, at the recurring shape of your disappointment, and to begin the stranger, more demanding, more ultimately rewarding work of turning your gaze inward. The person you keep falling for is not a coincidence. They are a message, not about them, about the parts of yourself that have been waiting, sometimes for years, sometimes your entire life, to finally be lived.